Datadog is a SaaS cloud monitoring and security platform that enables full-stack observability for modern infrastructure and applications at any scale, providing teams dashboarding, alerting, application performance monitoring, infrastructure monitoring, UX monitoring, security monitoring, and log management in one tightly integrated platform, plus 450 plus out-of-the-box integrations with technologies including cloud providers, databases, and web servers. Aggregate all your data into one platform for seamless correlation, enabling teams to troubleshoot and collaborate together in one place, preventing downtime and enhancing performance and reliability. Get started with a free 14-day trial by visiting datadog.com/cloudcast. That's datadog.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Middle of August 2022. Hope everybody is doing well. We continue to move on through the year. We're getting close to the end of summer. Days are starting to get just a little bit shorter. But anyways, hope everybody's doing well. For anybody who has been asking or sort of paying attention, Aaron is doing much better. He's over his COVID and some of the other secondary effects that he had from COVID. But stay safe out there, everybody. The stuff is still floating around. It still will catch up to you. We've had a few folks, friends and family who have gotten it as well. So we're not completely through the woods, but stay safe, get vaccinated, do all the things you can to keep yourself safe, because I know a lot of folks are planning to try and attend events here in the fall. Hopefully we get a chance to see a lot of people. Anyways, Sunday Perspective show. Excited to do another Sunday Perspective. And I read an interesting article this week that was called "Software is No Longer Eating the World." And, kind of interesting, provocative title. We are now 11 years since the famous Mark Andreessen article in the Wall Street Journal called "Software is Eating the World." And, it was an interesting article. I put a link to it in the show notes. Basically, it's interesting because I think it sort of ties together two things. One, the premise of it is essentially, software has been eating the world quite a bit for the last decade or so. This was sort of coming from a Silicon Valley specific perspective, but, maybe all that eating is done. And I thought what I would do is sort of dig into that a little bit. I think, if you're in the Valley and you're hearing things like Google's laying off some people, or Facebook's laying off some people, or the economy's getting a little tighter, or VCs aren't, dumping crazy amounts of money into the economy, it probably could feel like, sort of one of these situations in which, a lot of things are going on. Having lived through a couple of previous crashes, I don't know that this one feels exactly the same, although we'll see. Future will tell, and time will tell. We're definitely going to go through some bumpy patches, and we'll see interest rates rise and other things like that around the globe. But I want to dive a little bit into this premise that software is no longer eating the world. I think if we really sort of dig into it, and we'll get into it much more after the break, but I think there's quite a bit more eating. There's quite a bit more left on the table, some scraps, some leftovers, some second courses, all sorts of things. So we're going to kind of dig into that right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by CloudZero. For software-driven companies focused on growing margins, CloudZero is the only cloud cost intelligence platform that puts engineering in control by connecting technical decisions to business results. By analyzing cloud services like AWS and Snowflake, CloudZero provides real-time cost insights that help you maximize margins. Engineering teams can answer critical questions like, who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? What's the cost impact of re-architecting this application? With cost anomaly alerts via Slack, product-specific data views, and granular engineering context that makes it easy to investigate any cost, CloudZero is your complete cloud cost intelligence platform, connecting the dots between high-level trends and individual line items. Join companies like Drift, Rapid7, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast. Today's show is sponsored by Lightstep Incident Response. Built on the ServiceNow platform used by over 6,000 companies worldwide. Lightstep Incident Response allows you to scale your incident response team without adding to your monthly bill. With intelligent on-call scheduling and escalations, you get the full context of your service health. Lightstep Incident Response immediately pinpoints issues and uses machine learning to send group text, reducing your time to respond. And you can seamlessly orchestrate alert and incident triage with on-call scheduling across Slack, Teams, Zoom, desktop, and mobile. So get started today with a free 30-day trial of Lightstep Incident Response by visiting lightstep.com/cloudcast. That's lightstep.com/cloudcast. And get a free t-shirt after your first alert or incident. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, there's an interesting article. It's a link to it in the show notes called "Software is No Longer Eating the World." And I thought I would do is sort of dig into this in a couple of different ways. First, how did software go about eating the world? What drove this phenomenon over the last 11 years or so forth? And then, kind of, are we seeing a resurgence of, the incumbents, the ones who had been disrupted, kind of making a second run at, leveraging many of the same approaches that disrupted them previously, kind of turning the table. So I want to kind of dig into that as well. But first, let's talk a little bit about how software did end up eating the world or became this sort of phenomenon. I think it really boils down to a couple of things. First and foremost, we had a decade of projects that spun out of the big cloud companies, whether it was Google or Twitter or LinkedIn or a whole lot of other companies. We saw just tons and tons of companies spin out or open source projects that spun out. And, so many of those founders were ex-Google, ex-Twitter, ex-Facebook, all these sort of big companies. And, a lot of VC funding poured into that. A lot of, foundation work, the CNCF, all those sort of things, really came out of this. So, we saw a huge amount of interesting innovation that was locked up within the cloud providers kind of be exposed to the rest of the world. And, in some cases, these became cloud services that you could easily consume, a Kafka or a Kubernetes or something like that. In other cases, they were, trying to disrupt, things like IT and other stuff. The second thing that happened was obviously, and we've used this joke before, every mobile app, every startup that was out there was basically trying to replicate through software, through mobile phone, through social networks, through various things, the gig economy, trying to replicate the things that your mom used to do for you. So whether that was, ride sharing, giving you a ride somewhere, having your groceries delivered, making your meals, walking your dog, being able to hire out for somebody to go pick up your laundry, whatever those things were, we had a huge explosion of those types of things happening. And then obviously we had a decade plus of, sort of growth economy, right? Low interest rates, lots and lots of VC funding, some crazy VC funding, lots of acquisitions happening. So, we've had a very, very explosive period of time. And the other thing that happened was, we've had this explosion through things like social media and, the power of computing in your pocket, that a lot of business models, because of the internet, because of, some various things happening, a lot of those things sort of coming together, we saw, just a massive, massive disruption of business models, right? We saw, the taxi industry and we saw the media industry and we've seen, electric cars and all sorts of stuff that were very software centric, tons and tons of financial services applications that are trying to disrupt the big banks, whether it's Venmo or Cash App or, 100 others that are out there. And we've seen this in all sorts of industries. Now, some industries are more protected or more entrenched in certain things, pharmaceuticals, maybe it hasn't been as disrupted as much, or oil and gas maybe hasn't been disrupted as much. But, we've seen a lot of huge industries, really kind of get disrupted. Now, you could make the argument that, it's been a decade of a lot of things, software at the center of disrupting those business models. But I think we're at a stage now where if I think about, are we really, at the end of software is eating the world? I almost feel like there's a flipping that's happening. Yes, there's a huge stage of we've lived through the last decade, and software has done a lot to disrupt business models, to create new business models, to connect people in ways that they never could before, to expose data like we never had before. A lot of transparency has happened. But I think we're beginning to see sort of the flip side of that, right? We're seeing incumbents who, were disrupted to a certain extent, are beginning to adopt new business models, right? We've seen the entire entertainment industry move to streaming. We're seeing things like movies being released on streaming and online, as the same day as in the theater, right? We're seeing electric cars not just be in the domain of Tesla. We're seeing every single major manufacturer, from Ford to BMW to General Motors to Toyota to everybody, making it a mainstream of what they do. And they're coming out with very, very good quality, high quality vehicles that they can produce at very, very high scale. So we're seeing that sort of pushback. We're seeing analytics working its way into every aspect of our life, from farming to sporting to sports to gambling to personal finance to all sorts of things, right? Like it's really, really hard these days to not find anything where you can't dive into all sorts of analytics about whatever the industry is, whatever it is. So that's sort of come back, and a lot of these companies have finally figured out, how to work that into their product, right? They got blindsided. Let's not be, let's not mess around. They got blindsided for quite a long time, but they've finally figured out, and some of it is from the fact that they now have access to a lot of the technologies that were difficult to get before. They've got access to cloud computing. They've got access to open source software. There are thousands and thousands of more people with skill sets that are available. More and more people don't necessarily want to live in Silicon Valley, right? We saw that phenomenon happen with the COVID-19 thing and everything. So a lot of incumbents are starting to sort of make a push, starting to come back. We're seeing things like, Disney Plus having, more subscribers now than Netflix. We're seeing, the automobile industry, be able to produce as many or more electric vehicles as Tesla, and, just things like that are starting to sort of come around. I think the second part is, many of the business models that were really, really disruptive, were able to do that because, as we've mentioned on a lot of shows this year, they were funded by incredibly cheap capital, right? We saw things like Netflix basically outspending the entire Hollywood industry. We saw, Uber being able to go and break laws in all sorts of countries and do so because, they had so much funding. They were able to sort of defend themselves with lawsuits. And we saw this in a number of things. And we're beginning to see some of those business models break down, right? We've seen Uber have tremendously difficult times and hence not be able to offer cheap rides like they used to and be able to take market share like they used to. We're seeing Netflix struggling and having to now move to an ads model. And we're seeing this in, a number of areas where the disruptive model that was able to gain market share because they had access to so much cheap capital, didn't turn a profit. We're able to gain market share and gain tremendous brand awareness and so forth, but didn't always turn that into viable business models. And they're beginning to struggle. And now that capital is nowhere near as cheap as it was, they may continue to struggle, right? We'll see how they adapt and so forth. Now, the other thing we're starting to see is, we saw the rise of huge monopolies around advertising with Facebook and Google. We saw huge monopolies around, social media or retail or whatever. And we're beginning to see some of the monopolies, in this case, Apple, being able to, leverage their monopoly to disrupt some other monopolies. So we're seeing Apple be able to leverage their, huge footprint in smartphones, in devices, to be able to implement this new, sort of safety tracking, ad tracking or turning off ad tracking, and being able to take billions of dollars of revenue off of Google's and Facebook's and really disrupt their business. So, we're beginning to see, not just disruptive behavior, but monopolies disrupting monopolies, right? We're seeing TikTok completely dismantle Facebook, where, Facebook doesn't know what to do with themselves anymore, and they're trying to reinvent Instagram and other stuff like that. So, I think there's a lot of games still to be played in this space. And in some cases you can argue, well, it's monopolies fighting with monopolies. I don't know that that's great. Yeah, that's a fair argument. But we're not living completely in a world where everything is, the disruptors, the small are completely, Goliath is beating David, or David's beating Goliath. I guess that would be the analog. So we're seeing some, the winds shifting, the board shifting and so forth, and then what often happens is when these things slow down, and I think this was a lot of what this article was about, in technology, we've come to expect that, well, when one trend tends to slow down, like the next trend will just be there. And, we just sort of expect that somebody somewhere is going to invent the next trend. And, I think we're now in a situation in which a lot of people are wondering what is going to be the next trend. Obviously, has been a lot of buzz. There was a lot of buzz around Web3 and crypto and metaverse and decentralized applications, decentralized ways of having identity and cash, and funding and sort of value floating around. And those things are sort of going through a trough of disillusionment right now. Now we'll see if they pan out. We'll see if they turn out to be scams. We'll see if they turn out to be only viable when, it's nothing but hype and a lot of surplus funding and government funding pumped into the system for the last 2 years and super cheap capital and so forth. But, Web3 is struggling. Things like Facebook, who changed from Facebook to Meta because they wanted to make a huge bet on the metaverse. And they talked about, well, this is going to be a $10 billion investment and it's going to take multiple years. Well, they just lost $10 billion in roughly the last 6 to 12 months because of what Apple did to their ad business, by basically turning off their ability to do targeted ads. So that'll be very interesting. Does that mean that Facebook no longer has the funds to do Meta, to do metaverse and so forth? Who knows, right? I think a lot of those things we assume that certain trends are going to go on forever. For example, like we've been seeing the trend of cloud computing and, public clouds and the big three clouds continue to do well. The expectation is that will continue to do very well for a long period of time. It's very mainstream. It's very sticky business. It continues to grow, even though it's growing slightly slower, but at larger volume. So, those things are profitable businesses, right? That's what we often look for is not only growing businesses, but profitable business and obviously sustainable businesses. The other thing is I think we have to remember that, software very much ate business models. Software disrupted business models. It allowed us to have information in our pocket, infinite amount of access to data, infinite ability to interact with each other and all those sorts of things. But it didn't necessarily disrupt everything. And I think sometimes we forget that hardware is about to go through yet another resurgence, right? Whether it's the things that Broadcom's going to be able to do in the enterprise space because they own VMware, whether it's what NVIDIA and TSMC and others are doing around manufacturing and GPUs and all those sort of things. I think we're going to go through a massive, new era of hardware innovation, whether it's VR goggles or something interesting, some sort of wearable from Apple or whatever those things might be. We will probably see a big hardware resurgence. We tend to see this in trends. Software takes off for a while, then hardware catches up, and then hardware introduces a whole bunch of new things, and then software takes off again, and we'll probably see that. So, I think the last thing I'll sort of wrap up on, and this is sort of a short one, but, everybody sort of wants to know what's next. And Web3 was sort of promised to be what's next. I think we figured out, at least in the early days of Web3, that Web3 is nowhere near as inclusive a technology, as stable a technology as Web2 has proven to be. Now, Web2 took a long time to sort of get to that stage, but it's got a long way to go if it's going to mature into anything. And so I think when we think about what's next, we all want to know what's next. I think the reality is, I think Web2, in the way that we know it, in the way that businesses are beginning to, the incumbents, the enterprises are beginning to, while they're laggards in some cases, beginning to leverage this technology. I think there's probably a whole nother cycle of Web2 that we're going to live through here. And it's going to come from, a second generation of learnings. It's going to come from more people knowing how to do these things. We're seeing people from, we just did a show this recently. I forget when it's going to publish, but, we're seeing a whole generation of product managers from Amazon now working in other companies, at AWS working in other companies, right? We're going to see a second generation of people that had that first generation, first 1.5 generations of Web2 experience, now going on to do that at banks, at car companies, at pharmaceutical companies, in the government, and in all sorts of ways that aren't just technology vendors and cloud providers. And I think we're gonna see that for another probably 5 to 8 years. I would guess 5 to 8 years or so. We're going to see sort of, Web 2.1, Web 2.2 type of thing, a second resurgence of that. So, anyways, I'll sort of wrap it up with that. Keep this show sort of short for a Sunday perspective, but. yeah, it's a good article to take a look at. I think it is always good whenever we see these inflection points to sort of wonder what's next, to sort of look back and figure how we got there. And, 10 years seems like a really long time. And then, we look back and then you realize like it really wasn't that long, and an amazing amount of stuff gets done in a decade, and how much it disrupts stuff. So take a look at the article. It's a really good article. It's a good time to sort of ponder now that, the economy is a little different than it was, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, whatever. And maybe start to make your own predictions on where things are going. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you think your predictions are going to be for the next 3, 4 years, 5 years. Do you think software is still eating the world? Is there anything left? What's the next trend going to be? So shoot us an email, show@thecloudcast.net, or send us a tweet at thecloudcast.net, any way you want to get in touch with us. But anyways, with that, I'll wrap up. Another Sunday perspective. Enjoyed spending some time with all of you. Thank you all for listening. We continue to be cranking out shows. We had a lot of really, really good shows coming up for the fall, so look forward to that. And with that, I'll wrap up. Thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the show. And if you get a chance, give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere where you get your podcasts. If you can just, give us a rating. 5 stars is great. If you're 4 stars, we think you're a hater, but that's okay. But give us some feedback. We'd love to know what you like about the show, what you don't like about the show. If you give us positive ratings, it helps. It boosts the show and helps other new people find it. So we're always looking to grow the community. So with that, wrap it up. Talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.